the film has a lot of moments that I mine from my own life. It's still very different in many ways. David's character, he is struggling academically, and he he's an only child. But I went to college, and I have an older brother, so the kind of situations are a little different. But emotionally, what David's going through in this film, his relationship to his parents, that felt very close to me. I feel very much in kinship with David's character.
And the expectations, I imagine, that the parents and everybody else put on you.
Yeah, I think there's something about how David wants so much for his parents and wants to, be able to give them, this idea of what is a good son, and that's something that I wrestled with a lot, especially kind of in the coming out process. I remember when I was thinking about, coming out, the first people I wanted to come out to were my parents. I didn't want them to find out from anybody else, and so they played such a large part in my sexuality that I think this is what David is wrestling with, is confused by, and I wanted to be able to make a film that reflected that.
So Joe, when we look at this from your character in the storyline, was it difficult for you? Were you when you were looking at the role, was it difficult for you? Were you afraid to take this role in any way?
There were some questions that I've always had with this role. And one thing that really helped me just solidify me just really going on board with this was the fact that the message was so great. No matter how brutal or how provocative this film could have been, I just really thought that this message was something vital for our community, especially the Asian American community. So yeah, I wanted to jump on board, and basically, if I had any doubts whatsoever, I did want to ask my parents just in case. And also another person who was important to me is my pastor, and I just talked to him, and they were both parties were just like, go for it, Joe, you can do it. If you think you do it, go for it, and try your best. Everything was so positive, and that's all I needed, you know what I mean? And yeah. And the hardest part was probably just the whole just the hard, just the relationship with the parents. And I'm sure so many people here could relate. It's because I just turned into THX mode. It's just the parents. They always they want the best for their kids, and sometimes the kids' dreams are not in parallel with the parents, and that's just tough. And it just rehashed a lot of old feelings where it was really hard for me, and I had to really touch up on personal experiences to really help me through this project.
Well, you did a brilliant job, and I'm glad that you are getting recognized for awards at Sundance, awards at Outfest. Andrew as well for the film, so I want to make sure that everybody is recognized for it. As producers, I keep coming back to the Korean American aspect because obviously it's so rooted in it, but this obviously had to have given you some challenges, especially when you're trying to contain it within a Korean community within Los Angeles. What came up in putting the film together that you had to sort of conquer or work around?
A lot came up that we had to overcome. I think one thing that was really difficult was the locations for the film, just because the locations are such a big part of the film, and we always talked about how the spa is a character in the film. And so finding the spa, finding the right place, and getting them to agree to let us shoot there, sometimes it's a business transaction and we didn't have a lot of money. So it's like, where can we get the money? Like where can we move the money from so that we can afford this? And one of the spas, the one with the blue neons, Andrew really wanted that spa, and we were like, it's too expensive, we can't get it, you need to prove why do we really need that. And then, they went together and they took some photos, and then we were like, oh, we get it, okay. We need that spa. And they persuaded us by saying that they would make it very fast, because it was already lit, so they didn't need to light. But we got that spa for like one night, and it was an overnight shoot, and it was really fast, and we just had to keep moving, and that's just how you have to do it. And you need to balance, right? What you sacrifice and what you really need. And I'm just very good at that, so that was helpful.
Well, you did a great job. I mean, when we now hear that was all shot out in one night, those scenes don't feel rushed. You obviously had time to do what you needed to do in there. So kudos to you as filmmakers for pulling that off.
To these guys, yeah. Well, then he's the DP and the producer, and he was much more involved in the whole dealing with the Korean community, because he was our Korean-speaking producer, so he can speak to that.
Well, yeah, talking or like some sort of lie, like having to come up with a lie. Not technically not lie. I was telling the pastor like half the movie what the movie's about is about Korean family. And it is. But one other thing, locations are hard for that reason, like trying to convince them of what this movie is about. But the other thing was, during the casting process, it was hard to sort of find kind of, well, first question was well, can it be a Chinese actor who can play this role, or he's Japanese? We really wanted to get Korean actors who can play this role authentically. So that was one thing that kind of hit me for the first time during the process, well, this is about very specific culture and people. Can there be actors finance it, we're willing to put more effort to find those actors who can actually be those characters. So that's something that also came to my mind too.
That's the spot that's downstairs from Roundfest, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that spot is like a 2-minute walk from your office. I'm sure you know.
Fair enough. I want to make sure we have some time for questions from the audience. Anybody? Yes, please, right here.
Yeah, it's a great film. Loved it. Very emotional. Can relate on so many levels. My question, the way it ended, can you tell me what happens to the David character in your mind? And then I want to ask the actor, what do you think happens to David at the end of tell me his future if you can see that far.
It's an interesting question, because actually we wrestled with the ending a lot, and we scripted a different ending at first, and we shot a different ending that didn't quite work. And so for me, it's this idea of David's gone through this journey, and at the end, people were like, oh, he should come out to his parents, and I was like, oh no, he's not. Are you kidding? No way. And so for me, it's like that ending. It goes back to this idea of running as like a ritual, and that he can choose where he wants to go. That he has the agency, and that he's moving forward, even if it's really hard. And when he leaves the film, he kind of runs out of frame. For me, it's this kind of final act of rebellion where he's almost telling us we're not allowed to see what he does. It's not up to us what he does in his future. It's for him. And I like to think of David as a character who actually exists in this world, and that we have to respect his decision to either come out to his parents or to not, or I think it's this kind of humanity I wanted to give to that character.
I love you, sure, by the way. Anyway, for David, to me, was throughout this whole movie, I felt like he was kind of in this cocoon stage, where he's just bombarded, and he couldn't really express himself to the fullest he can. So there's a lot of things that he really couldn't do. And then at the end, when he starts running and sprinting, I felt as if that character, David, has become a butterfly at that time, and he's just free, and that's how I got it. It's more symbolic in that sense, and yeah, that was my thing. The future, I don't know, maybe a lot of gay sex, a lot of
Spa night 2.
So, what inspired you to use the spa as the inspiration for David to explore his sexuality?
Yeah, so for me, it's this idea of how, as I started to become more and more comfortable with my gay identity, I kept it very separate from my Korean identity, and so what I was interested in was this kind of intersection. So a few years ago, I was out to drinks in West Hollywood with a friend, and he told me that he had a hot hookup with a guy in the steam room of a Korean spa. And actually exactly what he said was that he gave this really hot Hapa guy with a huge dick a hand job in the Korean spa. And he's actually here in the audience today. Just stand up for a second. Yeah, so for me when I heard that, I was like, holy shit, that's insane, because the spa for me was this place where I went with my dad. It was very cultural. It's a very family oriented space, and so to find out that this spa would then be kind of this intersection between my gay and Korean identities was really hard to wrap my head around, and felt really wrong, but then also really sexy, and then I realized it was the perfect opportunity to talk about, like, well, what is a queer Korean American identity?
Yes, please.
I just want to, first of all, I'm so excited about this film. It resonates so much with me, and I feel like this is the benchmark for me for Asian American cinema. But I would love to hear a little more about what you were just kind of talking about like that. Do you find it that sometimes being Asian American and being LGBT American, is that sometimes at odds, and like how I've seen you explore it in your work before, and how is it changing from when you started this process to now, and where do you think it's going to head after that?
Yeah, so for me the biggest conflict is that, so as a Korean American person, my Korean identity is really confined to the trappings of my family. If I was a Korean citizen, if I lived in Korea, my Korean identity would be the country that I live in, my citizenship, the culture that I consume, my friends. But because I'm American, so much of my Korean stuff is just about going home to dinner with my family, going to Dole first birthdays with my family, speaking Korean to just them and no one else. And so because it's so confined to family, it's super heteronormative in my head. It's a mother, a father, and a son. And if I can't have a family the way that my father had me and the way that my brother had his son, if I can't do that because I'm gay, am I still Korean? And that's a really hard thing. And the Dole first birthday is really interesting to me because I think about if I have a child with my future partner, will I have a first birthday ceremony? If my child is adopted and not ethnically Korean, would they still consider themselves Korean American because of who I am? And these are weird questions, and I get really overwhelmed thinking about them, which is why I think I try and process it through film. And so for me, it's this idea that this conflict isn't necessarily about Korean Christians being being gay is bad. It comes down to this very strange idea of family and connection and being away from your homeland, you know, kind of the trauma of immigration. So yeah, you know, I don't know how it's changing. I can say for me, what I'm trying to do with something like Spa Night is like forge something that feels authentically queer and Asian American, you know? People laugh at me when I say this, but there's something about Game Boy in West Hollywood, like a gay Asian American night, you know, that like for me was like, oh, this is like queer and Asian, and in the same way, like the way that like gay cruising at this spa feels kind of queer and Asian, and how Spa Night can feel kind of queer and Asian.
You did a great job, I thought. So much of this film is about spaces in making these really identify with the Korean experience. But I heard a lot when you were talking about sort of that immigrant experience. They were able to sort of define that and experience that within the spaces you defined.
Yeah, you know, I think space is a really interesting way of telling a story. Like actually when I was developing Spa Night, the very first draft that I wrote, like all took place at the spa in one night. And they read it and they loved it, but it was like, oh, like it's hard to make this movie, and it actually didn't get at what we wanted to talk about, which was, you know, this kind of tension between sexuality and family and Korean American culture. And so as we expanded, my first instinct was actually just to kind of list like what are the places that Korean people, you know, exist in Los Angeles, and it was like church, restaurants, golf range, like karaoke, you know, like Asian American frat party, like there are these things, and I just kind of string them together, you know. So I think space, weirdly, like it dictates how we live our lives.
Oh, that was very, very effective. So you had a question, yeah.
And you kind of alluded to it. I was just amazed at the locations where you were able to film, and particularly if you're talking about the church service. Was that an actual service because it was very convincing, or were the extras?
Oh man. Okay, so it was an actual service because I wanted to see Korean people. I wanted the authenticity of the space. I had like a major like breakdown about that scene because I was like, oh, like they don't know what the film is totally about, and they were so nice to me, you know. Like I went the weekend before to just be in that space, and you know the pastor was like super nice, and he asked me to stay for lunch, which I did, and then I remember calling a friend and just crying because I was like, I don't know if I can do this, and I met up with Kijin and I cried at the Koreatown Plaza. And I went to the producers and I was like, I don't know if we can shoot the scene. And it makes me angry that I can't shoot the scene because it's such a big part of Korean culture. You know, it's like I wanted to show this. And so it upset me that because it's a queer story, I wouldn't be allowed to show this aspect. And so the thing that got me through it, you know, for worse or for, you know, for good or for bad, was the fact that like in this congregation there's about 150 people. You know, I was like, one of them is bound to be queer in some way, and that a film like this could be meaningful for them. And so I was going to do it for that person.
Yes.
Andrew, I just want to ask you, what's the one thing that you took away from this film, like probably your biggest learn while making this?
I think for me there's always this question of like why you make your movie. You know, like movies are expensive, and you know you take up so many people's time, like so much time and energy. You know, so like the reason you make something, it has to mean something to someone, and so as I've been thinking about like my career, like I always want there to be some sense of like, you know, what drew me to Spa Night, and so I think like it's helped me solidify what I hope to do in the future.
What's next?
I'm developing a few things. You know, there's like one project that I'm very excited about that I can't talk about, but I'm always going to look for stories about family. You know, I think family is so beautiful and messed up, and I just want to be able to tell more stories about that.
To get a little political in this moment, especially when you're looking at this fact that you're looking for a film that is reflective of your experience. Diversity has become such a buzzword within Hollywood, but it seems to me, and I'm looking for your perspective, it seems to me that the Asian community is still oftentimes left out of that discussion. That it seems so very focused, on other areas that absolutely need more representation, but it seems to me it must be incredibly frustrating because I don't see that occurring. In how do you deal with that? What are your hopes?
I ultimately think that I'm not gonna wage a war about I'm not getting the attention I want for the Asian American community. Diversity is going to just telling more stories, more human stories. I think it's gonna push us along. And I think we all have different challenges, each community, and I think with the Asian American community, I hear so much about Matt Damon in The Great Wall and Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell. I get that these
Tilda and
Doctor Strange. I get that these big blockbustery type of movies are the ones that get written about the most. But there's so much work happening, on the independent level, that's showcased at festivals like Outfest and at Los Angeles Asian Pacific. People should give those films more attention. Should find the value in them, even if they didn't necessarily cost a lot of money. This is really important. So I really encourage people. It's if you don't see the films that you want to see at the AMC or the ArcLight, go to the film festival or go to the independent cinema because they're there, and we just have to keep supporting that work.
It seems to me television is changing a little, which was painful and tough for her, and now we're at least seeing a little more. So hopefully there'll be much more change. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the casting of the three principal characters?
Yeah, so the casting was really complicated because we had such specific requirements, and then of course just the type of character, and Joe came in kind of the second to the last casting. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't know of Andrew's previous work. Because I was working in Asia for a while, and literally maybe 3 months after I got back, or 4 months after I got back, I saw this posting on the internet, and I was really fortunate. Went there. It was a small little theater, and it was really dark and kind of sketchy looking, but I just went in there. I tried my best. And I was really fortunate that Andrew, I guess, unliked my performance, and it was, from there, it was just it.
What were some of the challenges you really were worried about her facing the casting?
Well, the parents, we brought the parents from Korea because we were looking for actors who could, fit all the requirements that Andrew was talking about, and, be the right age and be good actors and speak Korean fluently and not sound like they've lived in America for a long time. And so that for us as producers was a big turning point of we are gonna have to swing it and pay what it takes to get a visa for these two actors because they are the best people for this role. And we are very happy with it because I think they both did an amazing job. So, but that was, there is a moment when you're $6,000 for the visa, and then who knows if we get it. So.
Yeah, that was the scary part, was that it could be rejected and the money would be gone and then we wouldn't have an
It was funny because the other producers, Kelly and David, who are not here, they are both American and we are both immigrants. And so when we were talking about visas, they were like, "Oh, we need a guarantee that we're gonna get a visa." We're like, no, that's part of our lives.
Yes, please.
Hi.
In the middle.
Do you ever find that there were moments where the film was too gay for the Korean community and too Korean for the gay community?
Gosh, I have to say, like, I was a little bit afraid that the kind of log line of the film would be a turnoff to the Korean community. That they would be like, gay sex, no way. But we just got interviewed and reviewed by the Korea Times and H.J. Park, who's like an institution, like loved the film, like gave it his highest review, and that was really special. And it's my hope that the Korean American community takes a chance on this film, and I think part of that is going to be like younger Korean Americans bringing their parents to see this, and their parents being like, I don't know why you're taking me here, and just being like, go with it. And then to talk about like, is the film at times too Korean for gay audiences? Some of our most like negative reviews of Spa Night came from gay white reviewers, and one of them was basically like, this isn't gay enough. It's like, where's more cruising? And I think that like the thing that upset me about that was that like, these are good reviewers who've watched many, many films, and for me it's like, I can't say you can't have that opinion, and in some ways like, yeah, like would I have liked to have seen a little bit more penis in that movie? I could have put in plenty more, but I think the takeaway for me was that like, there just needs to be more journalists and critics, people of color, women, queer, like I think it would just give us a better sense as to like, the success of a film, or what a film is about. Like so that's my hope. I got like a really like so-so review at Sundance, and I like wanted to write something to the reviewer, and then instead I just like posted like a review by a woman of color. Let's do this.
You might need to realize it's, every queer story isn't about sex.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very true. Yeah.
Right.
One thing I'd like to add to that is that, we've been talking about authenticity. Those are really specific challenges. We wanted to be Korean American specifically, and also queer. So that's kind of like two challenges altogether. In order to balance those two things, whenever I get asked that question, I like to ask back, like, has there been any movie like this specific, asking these very specific questions? I think it's important to start a conversation by actually doing it. So that's what I'm really proud of. Just wanted to ask that.
Any more questions? Yes.
For the producer, how easy it was to try to get a scratch or a first cut from Andrew, since I see that Andrew's very emotional with you. So how was that editing process from the producer perspective? Like, it was something easy, or it took him a while to find the right and fine-tuning that he really...
Are you afraid of this answer?
No, it was actually, I think it was your first time not editing your work. And that was something that we as producers felt strongly about, that we should get an editor for this because it's the first feature, and we thought it was important to get fresh eyes on the material. And so we had this great editor, Yannis Kalkiadakis, who's actually Greek and didn't speak Korean, and somehow cut the dialogue, and we were like, oh wow. It was really impressive. But I think it was a process, and as always, like a new collaboration, it was a process to find the language, to talk to each other, but we knew they would, because knowing both of them, and I just think that's what took a little bit of time, and then we started seeing cuts, and there is a moment, I think, as a producer, when you watch a cut, and you're like, oh yeah, like, there is a very clear moment, there's a very clear version of the film when you're like, they cracked it. And when that happened, then it was, fine-tuning and getting like feedback from like people who didn't know the script, but then, you're basically there, I think, at that point. So, it's good.
It's all the way in the back.
Yeah, for Andrew, I just had a question about a certain scene. So throughout the movie, we see David have these urges, and then finally he has a moment where he's able to fulfill those urges. And then what happens afterwards, I was expecting him to have a moment of joy or this amazing experience, but it actually turns into a moment of like great shame. It seems like he's like scrubbing himself and he's starting to bleed. I was wondering if you could just talk about that scene, your decision to go that route versus to show kind of this enlightenment all of a sudden that he's finally fulfilled this urge that he's had.
I love that you avoided saying the word sex.
Very African American of me too.
That's kind of cool. That scene is interesting for me because I don't think we ever talked about it as shame. Although I know that that's a very, very like easy interpretation. It's definitely, I think you can't avoid it. But in talking to Joe about this scene, it was more about kind of scrubbing a new person into being. It's kind of that growing pains. And it kind of goes back to like, what is the utility of the spa? Like, what is, why do you scrub? And it's it's a growth thing, it's a healing, a rejuvenation. And is that painful? Often, very much so, but is it something that leads to ultimately a better place? Yes, and I think you see a little bit of that. There's hints of it. I mean, there's that moment that he has with the spa manager, like right after that scene where he kind of slams the key down. It's like, I think David's taken this kind of sexual desire and is now slowly but surely forming it into an identity. Please.
That was the scene that actually resonated the most with me. Because the catharsis led to the freedom from the pain. That's what I took from it. And it's that freedom itself, the release of the pain.
Yeah.
And the distillation of the pain before the release is actually what I took from it. And it's very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like David is so kind of bottled up,
Yeah.
that it almost takes like a physical wound to have to just like let things out. And
The rawness of the
Right.
scene
Yeah.
in itself is very powerful.
thank you.
And then the other part that I liked a lot, when you were running the last time, because the speed was faster than the previous running that you did. And to me, that was like you were a plane taking off to freedom.
We'll talk about that. Joe got real tired.
I'm a runner, I can relate to that.
I think you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just scratching my head.
You talked about the class dynamics of the film, especially between
Yeah, the class thing was interesting. Like part of the reason I wanted to talk about the family's kind of financial situation is because in some ways that it's this idea of like needing to not only take care of your family but also take care of your family financially. And I remember very early on in the screenplay, the family being like very poor, and then I realized that like that felt wrong and a little icky, and the more interesting tension is that it's not about the family being poor, it's about the family trying to hide it. That they're trying to keep up appearances within this community in order to show a certain level of success. that's often really unfair and you know, not always achievable. You know, so that scene, I really like that that church lunch scene, because there's kind of so many things going on, and there's a little bit of a game between Mrs. Beck's character and So Young, the mom, and it's this, everybody knows what's going on, but no one's gonna explicitly say it.
So we've got time for one last question. Yes, please, right in the back.
I just wanted to say that I love the film. I think it's very provocative, just in its very existence. Not provocative in a sexual way, but in a representation, diversity way. And I was just curious, I know you aren't necessarily a voice for all queer Asian creators out there, but what kind of queer Asian stories do you think might sort of come out of people being inspired by watching something like this?
Yeah, you know, I think for me it would be such a shame if Spa Night was like the queer Asian, like, you know, thing. Like, this is not everyone's story. You know, it's one character's story. And so it's my hope that like a film like this can inspire other filmmakers to tell their version of their story, and that all together we have this kind of collective of queer Asian film that shows the diversity of our community and therefore our humanity. So, you know, it's like, I remember one of our test screenings, there was another queer Korean American man who went to a boarding school and went to my same college, you know, like lives here in LA, is a filmmaker, and he watched it and he was like, oh, this is okay. And I was like, you don't connect to this like I do, you know? And it's because, oh, like he's not the same person, no matter how many similarities we have, you know? And so for me, it's like, well then, like you should go do yours, and then we can like screen our films together, and you know, like I want it to be a vibrant cinema culture. So, I just really quickly want to say thank you so much all for coming, and you know, if you like the film, please tell your friends. You know, a film like this, it's really word of mouth that gets it going. And if you didn't like the film, but you have friends who you think might, yes, thank you so much.
Well, actually, I want to add to that. It's even more important that they see it this weekend.
Yes.
Seriously, an opening weekend, it has everything to do with the film's success. So why don't you come back tomorrow? You know, bring a couple friends, drive them over, make sure they actually show up. This is how you can help make sure that this film, and as Andrew said, other films for the Asian community are a success. We have to show up, and we have to buy tickets, and it's incredibly important. Thank you. Can we give everybody another round of applause?